I can't. All right, so in going into, we're about the middle of chapter 15, and this is our second to last class, so next Thursday, 2 days from now, will be our last one. And then we have our final, December 11th. It'll be open, did I say noon to 7? Isn't it funny? 12 to 7. I just said it like 3 minutes ago, and then I can't even remember what I said 3 minutes ago. That's how you know I'm losing my mind. Anything you guys want to discuss before we start? Yes? That was optional, right? Right. So if you want your exam grades to just be based on exams 1, 2, and 3, then you don't have to take exam 4. But if you go in and take it, it can replace your lowest grade if you do better. If you do worse, then it wouldn't hurt your grade at all. So it's one of those, like, if you need it, study for it. If you don't need it, then you can either not be stressed or you can go in there and wing it and see if you can do better. I mean, it's always worth a shot. Anybody else? Does that answer your question? Okay. Okay. So picking up where we left off, and this is funny because Valerie, oh, there you are. You were just asking me this question today. What this picture is of is a moth and a plant. I believe they're both from Madagascar. And so this moth has a tongue that's actually 11 inches long, and the flower has the petals reach down 11 inches. And so these two things have not one came first or one came second. They have co-evolved as a species, so they are interacting with one another because the moth is sucking out the nectar and the plant is getting pollinated. And so they evolved together. It's not one came first. And they did so, which we've already talked about back in chapter 3, through natural selection, where organisms are better adapted to their environment, so they're able to survive and reproduce and pass on their genes to their offspring. And so it's not necessarily just animals that co-evolve. It can also be that abiotic resources can affect biotic things. So abiotic is things that are not alive, and biotic are things that are alive. So the amount of water that's available, the temperature, the amount of carbon or nitrogen, those things are all going to shape living species, and that's going to cause natural selection to occur. And so each species' role in a community is defined by its niche. Now, I'm not sure if it's niche or niche. I've heard it pronounced both ways, but I say niche. And so what a niche is more than just the place that an organism lives. Niches have features that are the entire amount of space that an organism requires. So no organisms just live in their nests. They have territory. They have lots of different food and food types that they utilize. The timing of the organism's reproduction. So does it reproduce in the spring? Does it reproduce in the fall? Can it reproduce every month of the year or only during a certain season? And the organism's temperature and moisture requirements. So in the case of a bald eagle, what you can see here is that during the summer, they live up here in Canada and in Alaska. And then during the winter, they will often travel south because it's obviously warmer there. But the bald eagles that live in this area can actually stay there year-round. So they will be in that space fall, spring, summer, winter. But they can utilize almost all of North America. And so what we call this is, we call this a fundamental niche. So this is the full range of environmental conditions under which a species can live. If we go back here to our bald eagle, bald eagles are capable of living in this entire area. But they're going to have what's called their realized niche, which is where and how a species actually lives. So where is it actually occupying that space? Because obviously a bald eagle isn't going to fly all around North America, but they will do some migration if that's necessary, depending on where they call home. So They don't always get the conditions that they want in every season, because as you know, in the United States, especially up here, we always have fluctuations in our environment. So they may move around depending on the temperature, on the moisture, not just bald eagles, but everything that we have out there. So it may be hard to see competition, competition between species, or competition which is abiotic, so the things that are affecting the species that are not alive, but it still is going to influence its community structure. So here's an example of when we have niches that overlap. This is Paramecium. These are single-celled organisms that are being grown in a particular environmental condition. So in one test tube, we have one type of Paramecium. In another test tube, we have another type of Paramecium. They're similar because they're both the same species, but they may occupy two different niches. So if you grow these two species together, then what may happen is one of two things. We put both of these species together in the same test tube, and one is better able to survive than the other one. So this one survives and this one dies out. And this is called competitive exclusion. So one species utilizes the resources better or more efficiently, and it drives the other one to local extinction. And another thing that can happen is we can have resource partitioning. So maybe one species does better at the surface, and another species does better further down. And so the species alter their patterns of behavior or their use of the niche and divide the resources, because you can't have two species in the exact same place in the exact same time wanting the exact same resources. And so here's an example of that in nature. If you look at the Galapagos Islands, there's lots of different species of finches, and on the different islands we found that some of the finches better eat medium-sized seeds, and then other ones better eat these smaller-sized seeds. So as we have droughts and rainy seasons, then the two types of finches that are on these different islands, if this one is dry during drought time, then this finch is going to eat bigger seeds, and so the ones that have bigger beaks are going to be able to crack more seeds, get more energy, have lots of sex, and have lots of babies. And if you have this finch species that's better able to eat small seeds, then it's going to find the small seeds, eat them, get lots of energy, have lots of babies. And so eventually, when they're on the same island, they would be competing. And so if this one does better and eats the larger seeds, and this one does better and eats the smaller seeds, then they're able to live in the same environment and coexist. But if they were duking it out here amongst similar-sized beaks, then one species might be able to exclude the other species and be able to survive and get all the seeds and get all the energy and have all the babies. And so this is competition where they are competing for resources. And so when this happens, we have a shift in evolution, and this change is called character displacement. Character being the characteristics or the traits. So the different characteristic here, they both look approximately the same, but they have different characteristic beaks. And so this one is going to go for the larger seeds. This one goes for the smaller seeds. So displacement means that they are going for different things. And so when we're looking at nature, it's often difficult to tell whether or not we're seeing competition, because you don't know what you can't see. So sometimes we can look back, hindsight is 20/20, and say, oh, these two things were competing against one another. That's why fossils are so important, because we can tell what was happening in the past. But it's often difficult to see actually happening in the environment as we're looking at it. So one of the things that we can always look at is predation. We can always look at what is eating another species. So predation is one of those things that is a harsh reality. Animals eat other animals, animals eat other plants, And so predators and prey are constantly evolving so that the predators can get more prey and the prey can get away from more predators. And so that's one of the places we see a lot of shifting. In predation, this is one of the most important forces that shape the composition and the abundance of species in a community. And it's not just a lion eating a gazelle. I think that's what we tend to think of when we think of predation. We think of those big predators like the great white shark or the bald eagle or the lion. But everything in nature is really preying on something else, because animals are going to eat plants, like herbivores are plant eaters, carnivores eat herbivores, eat other carnivores, and then sometimes we have a predator that is smaller than the thing it's actually preying upon. If you think about mosquitoes, they are preying on humans, preying on other types of animal species, and they're nowhere near as big as their prey. And so lots of different things eat other things. So the next thing that we can look at is exotic species. So we often call this an invasive species. If you hear about a species that's brought to another place that did not originate there, then we call it an invasive species. And a lot of times these are exotic types of animals, like people bring over parrots from Africa or from the exotic jungles and then release them outside. Actually, in Chicago, over the last 20 years, they have a parrot species that was introduced there. They think that 2 of the species got out from a pet store, and it was a male and a female. They started a breeding colony, and now these parrots are this invasive species in Chicago, and apparently they drive everybody crazy, that people are trying to trap and kill these birds because they're loud and squawky, and they build their nests up on electrical poles and then cause power outages. And so when you put these exotic species into novel habitats, so bring something in that wasn't supposed to be there before, it may be able to survive, it may not, and natural selection is going to start working right away in this new environment. So if you think about ways that you can try not to be eaten, looking at prey adaptations, there are 2 different types of categories of defenses that predators or that we use against predators. There's physical defense and behavioral defense. The first of these physical defenses, we have these 4 different types: mechanical, chemical, warning coloration, and camouflage. So in a mechanical defense, like for example a porcupine, it's got its long quills that keep it from being able to be eaten by, I believe it's cougars that would prey upon them. So nothing can eat this porcupine because it has a mechanical defense, something that's actually a physical barrier to it being eaten. We also have, I think I made individual slides. Yep. Here, the mechanical defense, you can't eat him because he's got these long quills. In chemical defenses, this may be either plants or animals. Lots of different things have chemicals, like the poison arrow frog has, or poison dart frog, has these toxins in its skin so that nothing is going to come along and eat it. And so that's why they've been able to grow such bright, beautiful colors. It serves as a warning sign to a bird or to something that wants to eat it that, hey, I'm poisonous and you don't want to actually eat me. And plants have done the same thing. You can probably think of plants like, for example, strychnine. Strychnine has a very distinctly bad chemical toxin in it that if anything eats it, it will actually cause, I believe it's like a neurotoxin, causing it to have seizures and die. And so lots of different things have chemical defenses so that they're not able to be eaten. Lots of things provide warning coloration, usually this bright, beautiful color that says, I'm not available to be eaten. And so monarch butterflies are one of the greatest examples of that. Many things would want to eat butterflies, but don't eat this particular butterfly because it has a poison inside of it that will kill off any of the predators. So oftentimes in nature, when you see something that looks bright and beautiful, that usually means that it's deadly. And then finally, we have different things are camouflaged. So if you're a bird flying around over a forest, you're not going to be able to see this praying mantis because it's the same color as its background. And we showed you lots of pictures of this when we did the lab 8 on natural selection. We had the leafcutter bug that, I'm not sure if it was an ant, leafcutter ant, that looked like a leaf, and so no birds would be able to fly overhead and see those things. So this is a great defense, camouflage or blending into your background. Then we also have behavioral defensive. There are some that are passive and there are some that are active. Things like hiding from your predators or escaping from your predators. And then there is alarm calling or fighting back. So here's an example of two of those things. If you are something that normally gets eaten by sharks, like they would want to take out individual fish that are in this swarm of fish, it makes it so that the shark can't pick out any one of these fish, and so they move in this swarm so they can reduce the chance of being eaten by this shark, because the shark can't pick out any one of them and go after it when it's hovering in this big ball. So they're working together as a species to avoid predation. Here we have another one. This is kind of a disgusting one. There is a chick, and I don't remember the species name, but when something comes along and acts like it's going to eat it, it sprays out this disgusting putrid vomit, and that gets all over the face of the predator and then gives it a chance to get away. And so imagine if you're looking for a nice little tasty chicken meal and you get a face full of vomit. That is something that you would want to avoid. And so these predators have adaptations for enhancing predation, so ways that predators are able to better catch their prey. Here we have an example of a physical structure that has adapted on this anglerfish. So this is a fish that lives deep down in the darkest parts of the ocean, and thank goodness, because who would actually want to run into this on the beach? It's this horrible looking fish. It's got these giant teeth, and it's got a structure on its head that actually glows. And so what it does is it waves this little glowing thing around, and smaller fish are going to go over to investigate, like what's this bright light that's swirling around. And when they go right up to the bright light, he just swoops up and eats them. So he's tricking his prey into coming closer to him in order for him to eat them. And so why don't predators become so efficient at capturing prey that they drive the prey to extinction? So think of why are lions not so effective that they can catch every gazelle that's out there? Because what would actually happen is that if they ate all of them, there would be nothing left for them to eat. And so that's why we constantly have this amount of predators goes up, the amount of prey go up, and then as the number of prey weans out, it starts to go back down, and the number of predators go back down. So that's called oscillating, where you've got the numbers going up and down together. Because if you eat all of your food and there's no more food out there for you, then you can drive that to extinction. So here's two examples of that. If you think about parasites, anytime you hear the word parasite, usually I think of like tapeworms living in somebody's stomach that are eating their food. Here are an example of two different types of parasites. An ectoparasite, think about parasite is something that lives on a host. So an ectoparasite is something that lives outside of the host or on the host. And an endoparasite, endo means inside. So an endoparasite is something that lives inside of the host. So example here of an ectoparasite, they have like lice, ticks, mosquitoes. They live outside, but they go and feed on their host from the outside. If you're an endoparasite, however, you're living inside of the host, either inside of the stomach, in the bloodstream. Some parasites live in people's brains. There may be 3 to 4 times as many parasitic species as non-parasitic species on Earth. So you've got parasites inside of you right now that you are not even aware of. And the reason that they don't kill you is because if you're a parasite and you kill off the host, then you die along with it. And so parasites have gotten so good that they don't kill off the host. They keep taking and taking and taking, but they don't want you to die or else their next meal is gone. So some parasites, as they're described as predators, have these unique features where the parasite is generally much smaller than the host. So mosquitoes, much smaller than the humans that they feed upon, and they stay in contact with the host for an extended period of time. So when a mosquito lands on you, they stick their sharp beak inside of you and they're sucking out your blood for a while. A parasite can live in your stomach for a season, long enough for it to reproduce and then come out of the other end of you. The ones that are in your bloodstream, obviously going to be much smaller, but they usually have very complicated life cycles. So they have to have some way, if it's not living inside of you for its entire life cycle, then it has to have some way to get out of you. And the way that it usually gets out of you is through your feces. So first type of parasites, some parasites cause their hosts to basically go crazy. So one type of parasite is called Toxoplasma. It is a type of parasite that lives most of its life cycle inside of a rat, and in order to breed, it has to get inside of a cat. So how do you go from being a rat with this parasite inside of it to getting inside of a cat? Well, what happens is that as they are growing and multiplying inside of the rats, they release this toxin that eventually makes the rat go crazy and search out cats. And so then the cat sees this rat and says, oh, you know, here's my next meal. So it eats the rat and it gets the Toxoplasma inside of it. And then it multiplies and breeds inside of the cat, and it's expelled through the feces, and the feces get back on the rats and back into them. So it's going through a foolish or fearless behavior. So the rat appears to do something that's not in its best interest. Obviously, searching out cats is not a good idea if you're a rat. But this Toxoplasma causes the rat to do that so that it can go through the next phase of its life cycle that happens inside of these cats. Another similar case, one that you may be more familiar with, dogs with rabies. Dogs can have an inappropriate level of aggression in their host. So when a dog gets rabies, all of a sudden it becomes very aggressive. And the reason that it becomes so aggressive is because the rabies virus, once it introduces this rabid behavior into the animal, causes aggression and foaming at the mouth, which then when the dog goes on to bite another dog or bite a human, the rabies virus gets spread that way. And so dogs wouldn't normally bite other dogs, and dogs wouldn't normally bite other humans, but the rabies virus makes them have this inappropriate aggression so that it can be spread to its next host. And so it can cause things to display inappropriate behaviors. Here we have an example of a lancet fluke. So the fluke is basically a type of worm, and it lives most of its life cycle inside of the bile duct of a sheep. So the bile duct of the sheep is what feeds the bile into the liver, and so it's living here inside of the sheep, and it's reproducing. The sheep has its feces come out, and eggs are released in the feces of the sheep, and then the eggs are here inside of the feces, and they get onto the grass where the sheep are pooping, and the snails come along, and as they're gliding over the grass, they are going to ingest these eggs, and once they're inside of the snail, they hatch, and they as they are hatching, this snail forms a mucus barrier around it's called a sporocyst, and it releases this slime ball onto the grass behind it. And so what happens is, as it releases this slime ball, it's going to be picked up by ants who are then going to eat it. And these ants have this slime ball that the eggs are going to hatch inside of the ant. And the fascinating part here is that when the eggs hatch inside of the ant actually gets this new behavior where usually ants stay pretty low to the ground. They're crawling around underneath the grass. It will actually cause them to crawl up to the top of the grass where they are eaten by the sheep. So it's an amazing life cycle as it goes through the sheep into the feces, feces picked up by the snail, snail squirts out this slime ball eaten by the ant climbs back up to the top of the blade of grass and then gets accidentally eaten by the sheep. So it's kind of amazing to think 3 different organisms in order for this parasite to be able to survive and reproduce. Not all species interactions are going to be negative, however. Thinking about predators and prey, about one animal eating another animal, or one animal eating all of a plant, we have some species interactions that may not just not be negative, but may be positive for the other types of animals. We call this a symbiotic relationship, where 2 organisms are going to exist together, coexist, so that they can help one another. So here's our first example of positive interaction. So if you have a flower and the way that it is going to be pollinated is through bees, bees may come over and suck the nectar out of the flowers and pick up the pollen on their legs and torso and wings. And then as they fly to the next plant, they take the pollen and pollinate another plant. So this is a positive relationship. It's called mutualism. They're both doing something good for each other. The bee is getting a meal and the flower is getting pollen. So the bee is helping the flower is helping the bee. I don't know what he's yelling out from in there. Okay. That could go on for a while. Another type of interaction called commensalism is where one species does not appear to be affected at all, and the other species is doing something good. So here we have an example where this bird is keeping the parasites off of this ox. And so he's going to go around cleaning up the parasites, so he gets a meal, but he doesn't appear to, the ox doesn't do anything to the bird, he just kind of lets it crawl around and eat these parasites. So one isn't harmed, but the other one is helped. Talking about these different types of organisms within this community, communities can remain stable over long periods of time, or they may be in this constant fluctuation where we have certain species their numbers are going up while other species go down. We look at it really over a long span of time. This one's interesting because if you look at starfish, starfish, for as pretty as they are actually a really horribly invasive species. So they go in and eat everything around them until basically everything around them dies, and then the starfish will die. But they can come in as swarms and take over large parts of the ocean. Many communities are going to change over time simply because the different types of species are immigrating or emigrating. They're coming into the community or they're going out of the community. The interesting one that I'll show you whenever this PowerPoint is over is some of the pictures of Chernobyl. If you've ever heard of Chernobyl, Chernobyl was one of the largest nuclear reactor meltdowns in the history of the Earth. And so Chernobyl was in Russia when these nuclear reactors exploded. If the people didn't die right there, then they fled to get away from these nuclear reactors, and everything killed all around Chernobyl. And since there are no people there, a lot of animal species and plant species have come back in kind of wild and crazy ways. You see things that have tumors or that are growing out of control, but I'll show you the pictures whenever this is done. So what's happening when we have these climates changing? We're having a period of what's called succession. So if we have a community where the entire set of animals and plants have been destroyed, like by a fire or a hurricane or some other force, eruption of a volcano, then the first things that are going to come back and are going to colonize that area are things like fungi, bacteria, lichen. Lichen is like a moss, and seeds. So these things come in first, and they are going to begin soon after a disturbance leaves the area barren. So fire destroys the area. The first stuff that comes back, stuff blown in by the wind or brought in by the water, are fungi, bacteria, lichens, and seeds. Then you start to have the first things that are growing in the community. So the first things that are going to grow, things that grow the fastest, are going to be things like small grasses. This is lichens, things that can grow on rocks. And you're going to have other seeds that will come in here. So they begin to grow and trap the moisture, allowing seeds of other plants to germinate. Then you start to see the smaller herbs and small shrubs like small woody plants that are going to shade over the moss and are going to begin growing up here. So primary succession is when you have first things coming in on barren ground. Secondary succession is where it has a little bit of a head start with things that are living on it. So the disturbance happens first, then smaller plants are going to begin to grow. Eventually small trees begin to grow and they compete with the shrubs until eventually we have our final, what's called climax community. This is where we have trees that live for multiple years. They're the larger species that are outcompeting the initial shrubs and plants. And disturbance is this fundamental part of most ecosystems. Things have to get destroyed and happens repeatedly so that communities can come back and invade the area and begin to grow again. So going from barren land to small plants to shrubs to trees. And usually, if you think about Ohio, Ohio is a pretty climax community because we have lots of big trees that are around, and they're stable and they're self-sustaining. Bless you. So secondary succession happens much faster than primary succession. So it's much easier to grow if there's something already growing there than it is to grow if there's nothing growing there. So life and the soil, as long as soil is already present, that's the best place for succession to occur. Some species are more important in a community than others are. Like, for example, here we have a keystone species, like what I talked about with the sea stars being so invasive to ocean ecosystems. Keystone species, like the sea star, has an unusually large influence on the presence or absence of other species in the community. So here we can see we have sea anemones, we have barnacles, lots of different types of living things, kelp, grasses. But when you take these sea stars out of these intertidal zones, the species diversity is going to decrease because these mussels are going to take over and they will outcompete everything in the area. So this can be a sign of go back in. This can be a sign of there not being enough species diversity in a community because these things are going to outcompete all of the other things. And so what happens is that sea stars are really good at eating these mussels. And when the sea stars are there, they're going to take out a lot of the mussels and give everything else an opportunity to grow. But if you take sea stars out of the community, then the thing that grows the best is going to come up and overgrow the entire area. So species are oftentimes dependent upon other species in order to kind of keep the ecosystem in check. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 15. We're going to get into just the beginning here of chapter 16, and we'll finish up the rest of it. Well, there's like 10 more slides here, but we'll finish up the rest of chapter 16 next time, and whatever I get through, that's what will kind of be fair game for the final. Somebody email me and remind me to put up a study guide for the final. I need to do that before Thursday. So if somebody can remind me, please. Otherwise, I'll eventually get to it, but I would rather put it up sooner than later so you have plenty of time to study. So when we're looking at ecosystems, we often talk about something called biodiversity, meaning we have lots of different living things in an ecosystem. But it's very complex and it's very hard to measure, because what terms do you measure biodiversity on? Is it the number of organisms that are in an environment? Is it the biggest of those organisms? Is it the males and the females? Is it the numbers? Is it the size? It's a very complex and often changing number over time. So biodiversity is going to benefit humans in many ways. Having lots of different species that make lots of different compounds is going to benefit humans for lots of different reasons. So for example, here we have what's called the Pacific tree yew, or Pacific yew tree. It's a very, very tall tree that produces a chemical within its bark called Taxol. And this is something that humans have found effective in the treatment of cancer. So it makes a treatment for ovarian cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer. But if this tree goes extinct, along with it can go the treatments for a lot of these different diseases. And so the Pacific yew tree is endangered, and scientists are trying to find ways to keep it in the environment, because if it dies, the treatment for our cancers dies along with it. Here's a couple of others to consider. Vinblastin and vincreastin are two substances made by the Madagascar periwinkle. So Madagascar, like the trees in Madagascar, which he'll probably come out and talk about here in a second. The periwinkle is a type of, it's like a snail, but kind of like a clam, and it makes a drug used to treat leukemia. It's something that is also endangered. So if we allow the environment to get destroyed in Madagascar, this treatment for leukemia dies along with it. Also on Madagascar is a pit viper, which is a type of snake, and it produces a chemical called Ancrod, which is something that humans use to treat blood clots. So people take Ancrod in order to keep their blood from clotting and causing blood clots to move from the lungs into the heart, into the brain. We also have another chemical called epibetadine, which is produced by a Madagascar tree frog. And this small little tree frog is making a drug that's 100 times more effective than morphine. And so if these frogs are often the first species to become endangered in an ecosystem, because they're very susceptible to toxins or to pollution in the environment. And so if we lose this tree frog, we lose the chemicals that it produces as well. And that was the basis of a movie. I think it was called Medicine Man, and it had Sean Connery in it. He was trying to save a tree from a logging company. They were going to go in and cut down the rainforest, and he tried to save it so that he could save this species of ant that helped in treating cancer. It's a good movie if you haven't seen it. I probably haven't seen it for 20 years. So researchers also believe that there is a bacteria that is responsible for the faster than expected mopping up of large amounts of oil. So the most recent oil spill that you may have heard of was what was the name of the one that just happened in the bottom of the ocean where the cap came off of the oil well? Yes, the BP oil spill. And so one thing scientists did was they brought in these bacteria that eat oil, and it helped to clean up the oil spill. Was it just in 2010? I thought it was more recent than that. I guess I hadn't. Time flies when you're having fun. So used to go in and eat the oil from this oil spill. So if we don't have these bacteria, then we don't have anything to clean up these oil spills naturally. So biodiversity is very important, one, for its utilitarian value. So having lots of diverse plants and animals out there may help make our lives better through eating different kinds of plants, eating different kinds of animals. Biodiversity is also important for its aesthetic value. So having lots of different kinds of plants in your garden makes you feel all good and happy inside because you appreciate nature, how beautiful it is, and how pleasant it is to experience it. Anybody who's ever gone on vacation to somewhere tropical can appreciate biodiversity. My parents are in Cancun right now, and so they're appreciating biodiversity, and I am appreciating my son. We have symbolic value. So some of the animals that are out there have been symbolized, like the iconic jaguar that conveys powerfulness or abstract ideas. And then we have the naturalistic value, where people enjoying being part of nature, going out and fishing and scuba diving and hunting and hiking and what? What? No. Go to the restroom. Okay. So biodiversity is not easily defined. If we ask somebody what is biodiversity, we may not think of an area like Ohio. We have some ecosystems that have higher amounts of biodiversity. Like if you get into the tip of Florida, you can see lots of different types of species that live in ecosystems. So do we define biodiversity by where it is? Do we define it by what's in the ecosystem, the different types of species? Or do we define it by the variety of genes and alleles in these different species? So it's not just counting the number of species, it's also looking at genetic variability among organisms and the variety of the different types of species. So do we have a variety of different types of species and the different types of ecosystems or biomes that we see on Earth? So that was what I just showed you. Where do we have the most biodiversity? We're going to find most of our biodiversity near the equator. So if we look at the places where we can find the land mammal biodiversity, we can find that in a lot of different latitudes. But if we look at marine copepod diversity, copepod is a type of, nope, I'm thinking cephalopod. What's a copepod? I'm thinking cephalopod like a squid and an octopus. What's copepod? Somebody Google it real fast. Somebody Google it. You've all got smartphones. What's a copepod?
It's a group of small crustaceans found in the sea and nearly every freshwater habitat.
Okay, so go back in there, please. So it's I believe it's something like a krill or small shrimp. So they live closest to the equator. So the closer you are to the equator, the more you're going to see of these copepod species. So as you get up towards the poles, you're going to see less and less of them. So Usually, I would think that would make sense. Wherever we are closer to the equator, we have we have higher temperatures. We see lots more biodiversity. And as you get closer to the poles, less things are able to survive, so less biodiversity. Why are there more species in an acre of tropical rainforest than in an acre farther from the equator, such as the temperate forest or prairie? We have what's called the latitudinal biodiversity gradient, which means that in the higher temperature, higher rainfall, we're going to see a higher diversity of species than we would at a lower temperature or a lower amount of rainfall. So here, things that are affecting biodiversity, the amount of energy that is available right here at the equator is going to be greater because it's closest to the sun. We also have evolutionary histories. So communities are going to diversify over time, and the more time that we have passing from climactic events, such as our ice ages, we are going to see greater diversity in those areas. So ice ages are not going to have as big an impact on places like the equator, and rates of disturbances like fire coming through or a hurricane coming through, the longer that they have been there, the greater amount of species richness that we're going to see. And so some of the places on Earth that are near the equator are defined as biodiversity hotspots. Places like in the Philippines, where we see these beautiful coral reefs with all these different types of fish and corals, and then turtles and sharks. Tropical rainforests such as Costa Rica have a high diversity of plants. Here we have the island of Madagascar. There are 25 biodiversity hotspots around the world, so 25 different places where they cover less than 1% of the world's area, but they contain 20% or more of the world's species. So these are areas with great amounts of biodiversity that are very small but have lots of impact. So remind me, or I will go back in there and I'll put up the study guide. I did have a set of notes for you guys to put on Springboard. I had set for it to close today. I think I had told you guys, no, I set for it to close tomorrow. I told you guys it closed today, so I just fixed the time. You've got tomorrow until up until 11:30 to submit your notes from 11:25. And if you didn't take notes on 11:25, then you need to go watch the video from 11:25. If you did it, then that should be easy for you to upload. I'll put up the study guide. I'll put up the video from today. What else do I need to do? That's just uploading your notes. Were you not here the last time we did that? Okay, we'll talk about it.
You were going to do something about the exam, too, in your email.
I was going to do something about the...
You were going to create a post about the exam and the makeup and the tests.
Oh, that's right. If any of you missed any of your exams, like because of athletics or for really any reason, you have to at least have a reason for it, we can schedule a time for you to go in and make up the exam, and it'd be in the computer-based testing center, but I need to actually schedule you a time to do that. So we need to talk if you missed an exam that you need to make up during the finals week, because I have to put like a 2-hour window for you to go in and do that. So if you need to do that, then you need to talk to me. Otherwise, I'll put up the study guide for the final exam. Like I said, you don't have to take it, but you all should take it to try and do better. Does that sound like that covers it? Pretty much. Okay. Alrighty then.
Thank you.
Thank you. That seems like that went rather fast today.
What time is the final on the 11th?
You can go take it any time between noon and 7.
Okay, thank you.
But you should check the computer testing center. They put like